and thank you for joining us tonight. An earthquake rattling New Jersey, sending shockwaves across the eastern seaboard. Reports saying tens of millions of people feeling the tremor this morning. NTD's David Lamb is in New York City with more on this story.
On Friday, a brief and abrupt earthquake rattled New Jersey and parts of New York. This footage shows a dog enjoying a sunbath on the windowsill until a tremor sent him on high alert. Elsewhere in this house, frames were seen shivering as items took a plunge off the shelf. And a brief jittery moment inside this coffee shop. Preliminary reports indicate it was a 4.8 magnitude earthquake. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, it took place before 10:30 a.m. near Lebanon, New Jersey, just 50 miles west of New York City. But more than 42 million people reportedly felt it across the eastern seaboard, reaching from the Big Apple all the way down to Washington, D.C. I'm here in New York City, which is about 45 miles east of the epicenter of the earthquake. Now, I spoke to some folks and they said some people felt it, some didn't, but here are their reactions.
Yeah, my foreman said, "Do you feel that?" I'm like, "Feel what?" You know, because we're working construction. Usually this thing's moving, people vibrating, and like, we didn't feel it. And then all of a sudden I start getting text messages from people in South Carolina.
It was the sound and it was just a shake, you know, not like that anything wasn't moving, but it was just kind of shaking.
I was sitting on the sofa and the whole wall bent, like quivered, and I went with it. And I actually thought it was like a trolley going past the lights were shaking and the screen was shaking, we were shaking.
Officials said so far there's no major damage or injuries, but they urged residents to stay alarmed.
Earthquakes don't happen every day in New York, so this can be extremely traumatic. We know how this can impact you, but we're ready for the unexpected. This is New York City, and we respond accordingly.
We are going to be reviewing all potentially vulnerable infrastructure sites throughout the state of New York that is critically important in the aftermath of an event like this.
The earthquake also impacted air travel. The Federal Aviation Administration said flights at the New York Kennedy, Philadelphia, Baltmore, and Newark airports were put on hold while runways were inspected for possible damage. Friday's seismic activity marks the strongest in New Jersey in more than 240 years. The White House said President Biden had already spoken with New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy and added the administration will provide help if needed. Reporting from New York City, David Lamb, NTD News.
President Biden touring the collapsed Baltimore bridge as he asked the federal government to foot the entire bill for rebuilding it. Republicans say there must be limits. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more from Dundalk, Maryland, where President Biden spoke this afternoon.
Taking an aerial tour of the collapsed Francis Scott Key Bridge, President Biden vowing full support in rebuilding it and reopening the critical port of Baltimore.
I'm here to say your nation has your back, and I mean it. Your nation has your back.
And Biden also met with the families of the 6 construction workers who died during the collapse last Tuesday.
And our hearts are still breaking.
And Biden's visit comes as the White House on Friday asked Congress to approve an 100% federal cost share for rebuilding the bridge. And while Biden says he wants responsible parties to pay as well, he also vowed,
I fully intend, as the governor knows, to have the federal government cover the cost of building this entire bridge, all of it, all of it.
$60 million have already been approved as emergency funding to help clean the wreckage. But rebuilding the whole bridge could take years and billions of dollars. On Friday, Republicans from the House Freedom Caucus demanded limits to how taxpayer money would be spent on it. They say the U.S. must first make the foreign shipping company involved in the collision pay as much as they can, and then for any federal spending on this bridge, it needs to be offset by spending cuts elsewhere. They're also demanding that the Biden administration lift its pause on LNG exports. So now the questions are when and how Congress would actually consider funding for the bridge and what that exact dollar amount will be. Reporting in Baltimore, Maryland, Iris Howe, NTD News.
Israel Defense Forces have now released the findings of the investigation into the airstrike that killed 7 aid workers. The World Central Kitchen says the results can't be credible if Israel investigates its own failure. NTD's Jason Perry has the details.
On Friday, Israel Defense Forces shared the results of the preliminary investigation into the airstrikes that killed 7 humanitarian aid workers. IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari said the investigation was conducted by an independent body outside of the chain of command.
The findings of the investigation show that there were, in fact, a number of armed gunmen who boarded and left some of the vehicles that were identified during the course of the event. After some of the vehicles split from the others, the forces that were tracking the vehicles that went south did so thinking that these were Hamas vehicles.
The IDF then struck the 3 humanitarian aid vehicles, killing 7 innocent people. Hagari said the World Central Kitchen correctly coordinated its movements with the IDF. However, the soldiers did not recognize that the vehicles were associated with the humanitarian organization that had just delivered aid to the Gaza Strip.
The WCK vehicles were marked with the logo of the WCK organization on the roof. However, the cameras tracking the vehicles from above were unable to identify the logos, which were not visible at night. This tragic mistake could and should have been prevented.
Following the investigation, the IDF dismissed 2 officers from their positions and also reprimanded 3 commanders for the incident. The IDF also expressed their deep sorrow for the loss and sent their condolences to the families and the World Central Kitchen organization. But the World Central Kitchen released a statement following the investigation, saying Israel cannot credibly investigate its own failure in the Gaza Strip, and demanded that an independent commission investigate the killings of the aid workers. World Central Kitchen also said the root cause of the attack on their aid convoy is the severe lack of food in the Gaza Strip. And following demands from the United States, Israel on Thursday night approved the reopening of a crossing point in the northern Gaza Strip to assist with food deliveries. An Israeli government spokesperson said this is one of the crossing points Hamas terrorists used when they stormed into Israel on October 7th. Jason Perry, NTD News.
In the New York civil fraud case, the Attorney General is questioning the financial strength of the company that posted the bond for former President Trump. In a separate move, the AG is asking the judge to allow her to reopen her investigation. Meanwhile, a defendant in the Georgia RICO case is asking the district attorney to recuse herself. Our legal correspondent Arlene Richards has the details.
No one is above the law.
New York Attorney General Letitia James wants proof that the surety company posting former President Trump's $175 million bond is qualified to do business in New York and has enough money to pay the bond. This comes after CBS News reported that the bond was missing vital information, such as power of attorney for the bond provider, a financial statement from the company, and a certificate of qualification from the Department of Financial Services. According to CBS, James filed a notice after the report was published. The insurance company amended its court filing to add the financial statement and the power of attorney. But in a filing on Thursday, James objected to the company not being registered in New York, which is required to prove the company is financially able to pay. Trump's attorney Chris Keiss called the AG's filing another witch hunt. Trump or the insurance company have 10 days to submit a certificate of qualification. Judge Arthur Angoran scheduled a hearing for April 22nd to discuss the bond. In a letter to the court on Thursday, James asked the judge to allow the court-appointed monitor to investigate issues related to Alan Weisselberg's perjury plea. Weisselberg is the former chief financial officer of the Trump Organization. In early March, he pleaded guilty to perjury for lying about the size and value of the Trump triplex apartment. James wants the monitor to do some extra digging to find out if Trump withheld information before the trial. She wants the monitor to report back to the court within 2 weeks. In the Georgia case, defendant Harrison Floyd is calling on DA Fani Willis to recuse herself. He says she recorded a phone call she had with his lawyer. Floyd is one of 17 defendants, including Trump, accused of attempting to overturn the 2020 election in Georgia. Floyd's Georgia attorney Christopher Kacharoff told legal analyst Phil Holloway what happened.
By the way, Fannie did reach out to us, my colleague, one of my colleagues in Maryland, and was rude and abrupt with him on the phone. and he was dealing with the Maryland case. I was dealing with the Georgia case, and she ended up recording him.
Kacharoff said the recording is a felony under Maryland law, which requires both parties to consent. Floyd said in a social media post that if Willis doesn't recuse herself by noon on Monday, he may have to pursue all lawful remedies. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Former Trump attorney John Eastman is asking a California judge to reactivate his license. He said he needs to pay his legal bills in the Georgia RICO case. Eastman's law license was temporarily suspended after a judge in a disciplinary proceeding suggested he should be disbarred for his court filings and other efforts on behalf of former President Trump after the 2020 election. In a court filing, Eastman's attorneys argue that his legal fees in the Georgia case could exceed $3 million. Eastman is one of 15 remaining defendants, including Trump. Because of the suspension, he can't practice law while he appeals the decision. Meanwhile, Eastman was recently served with a subpoena. He told conservative network Frank Speech on Thursday that the subpoena is related to a civil lawsuit brought by Capitol Police officers against Trump. Flying immigrants into the United States. This controversial program by the Biden administration has come under scrutiny all week long. Today, it's now facing even more backlash. NTD's Arian Pazdar has the latest update.
Attorneys general from 20 different states, together with an organization called America First Legal, are now suing the Biden administration. That's over a parole program which allows immigrants to fly directly into the United States. The states already sued over this program a few months ago, but the court dismissed the case. The states now filed a motion to reconsider this decision and pick the case up again. Since last fall, over 380,000 migrants flew directly into the U.S. America First Legal points out that people in parole status are immediately given work permits and are entitled to every kind of welfare benefit after being present for 5 years. And in related news, Governor Greg Abbott was in New York on Thursday speaking about sending illegal immigrants to the Big Apple. The city's mayor commented on the visit a few hours earlier.
I'm going to offer him a stay in one of the Hercs so he can see what he has created.
Mayor Adams says his city managed to handle the crisis despite Abbott sending immigrants.
When we coordinate together, we should not displace problems to local municipalities. That is not what executives do.
But some might say Adams didn't always take this approach. In 2023, New York City came under fire from cities in upper state New York for sending illegal immigrants to them. And lastly, the capital of Wisconsin took $700,000 from a COVID relief fund and allocated it towards illegal immigrants. The money was being spent on utility bills, bus passes, gas cards, and more. Republican State Senator Dewey Strobel is now investigating the issue. His office told NTD that it's not the first time COVID money is being misused, adding that this is a direct result of the out-of-control spending happening in Washington, and that lawmakers should rein in spending and say no to these massive spending packages that lead to programs like this one. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
Coming up, April snow brings joy to some and misery to others. More on the severe weather that hit the Northeast. Was it an accident or an attack? Officials say it's too early to know exactly what caused the Baltmore bridge disaster. Lawmakers discuss what went wrong and why U.S. maritime infrastructure needs a revolution. And New Jersey and the surrounding states experience a rare earthquake. A professor of geosciences explains how earthquakes work and what makes them so powerful. Stay tuned for more after the break here on NTD News. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The March jobs report comes in hot and job growth remains plentiful at American businesses. The economy added over 300,000 positions last month and the unemployment rate fell to 3.8%, according to the latest data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The total far surpasses economists' expectations. They had projected a net gain of 200,000 jobs for the month. Economists attribute some of the discrepancy to immigration. Unemployment remained below 4% for 26 straight months. This is the longest such stretch since the late 1960s. U.S. employers hired far more workers than expected while raising wages. This is suggesting the economy ended the first quarter on solid ground, potentially delaying anticipated interest rate cuts from the Federal Reserve this year. April storm dumped heavy snow and intense weather in the Northeast. Some residents are enjoying the infrequent occurrence, but others see it as unfortunate.
An early spring nor'easter is hammering the Northeast with heavy snow, rain, and high winds, with some northern areas expected to get up to 2 feet of snow.
Well, it's special to get snow in April and to be able to get out and enjoy it, you know. It's fun being a Mainer, but we've been missing snow, so this is a special little sort of after the winter story gift, I guess.
I was just killing time at the grocery store, so hopefully my friend can plow the driveway, because I don't know how well the snowblower does in this weather.
But it also brings about some challenges and even fatality. Around 630,000 homes and businesses remain without power Thursday afternoon from West Virginia to Maine. Police say a falling tree in a New York City suburb killed a woman late Wednesday afternoon. Dozens of flights to and from area airports have been canceled or delayed, and schools and government offices are closed in many towns. People can expect to see heavy snow through Friday and lingering winds through Saturday. The storm comes as several other states continue to clean up from tornadoes and other intense weather that was blamed for at least 2 deaths earlier this week.
Back to the Baltimore bridge disaster, lawmakers probe whether it was an accident or an attack and what went wrong. NTD's Dawn Ma has more.
Officials say it's too early to know what caused the crash, whether it was an accident or a malicious attack. But one thing is for sure, there's lessons to be learned here, that perhaps America has been too complacent with port security. Here's the Heritage Foundation's Brent Sadler.
Protective dolphins, which would have prevented or deflected the full force of the dolly from taking out the bridge, were not in place. This was based on a similar incident that happened in 1980, but yet in the intervening years nothing was done.
Sadler says the U.S. is falling behind in terms of its maritime infrastructure, behind China and other countries as well. For example, America builds very few ships, as we found out today when Representative Carlos Jimenez asks the Port of Miami's deputy director about Miami's situation.
Are you familiar with most of the cargo ships that dock here?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
How many of those are built in the United States?
From what I can recollect, none.
Mr. Sadler, that's a sad state of affairs.
Jimenez says America used to lead in manufacturing, but now its Navy is smaller than China's. As American firms struggle with labor shortages, supply chain woes, inflation, and lack of investment, Chinese firms, on the other hand, are not, because they play by different rules. Here's what they are.
It's a state-owned enterprises, and so they benefit both from direct and also indirect subsidies. They also take their orders, most often, not from an economic perspective, but from a Communist Party's perspective.
Sadler says there needs to be a revolution in shipping, partially through a family of legislation. He says America's agencies are scattered across different departments. Sadler says they need to work together, that the laws need to expand shipbuilding, protect infrastructure, and make America competitive again.
And to help us better understand the science behind earthquakes, I'm joined now by Frederick J. Simons, professor of geosciences at Princeton University. Frederick Simons, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, a magnitude 4.8 earthquake hit the Northeast today. It was felt in New York City, New Jersey, Philly, and even in Maryland. While earthquakes might be common on the West Coast, why are they so rare on the East Coast?
Well, our coast is what we call a passive margin, and there isn't much actively going on geologically speaking. Everything has been sort of set in its ways for millions of years, but yet that doesn't mean that there aren't cracks in the fabric of the continental plate and in the oceanic plate as well. And so sometimes these cracks, they slowly accumulate their little bits of stress that they have left to accumulate, and then they go off, and then we have these relatively minor and relatively infrequent earthquakes.
How likely are we to get aftershocks that we can feel?
We've already had a number in this area, and I haven't felt anything yet personally, and I don't know anyone that does. They are small, 1.82, 2.1. Our instruments pick these things up. This is what we're doing as seismologists and geophysicists. We are monitoring the Earth's movement all the time, and we have networks of instruments. And so we count those things and we assess them. But the likelihood of us feeling shaking is ultimately not that great unless you're right on top of where that's going to happen. Here, I was away about 25 miles, about 40 kilometers away from where this happened, and it was a big shock. It was a strong, prolonged 35-second period during which this whole massive building that I'm in was shaking. And I grabbed my coat and I ran out, or rather, I looked for cover, but then it was over.
On that note, the USGS reported this quake was 4.8 magnitude with a depth of 1 kilometer. What is the significance of depth when it comes to how destructive an earthquake will be?
The closer we are, the shallower it is, the more damage there will be. And so an earthquake of a kilometer depth, that's ultimately very, very shallow. That's pretty much right here on the surface. And so that is part of why we are feeling it so intensely, because it is not distant from us, neither in linear distance along the road, but nor in how deep you have to go into the earth for finding where that energy originates. If you hear about those earthquakes in Japan or in Alaska or in Chile, those are going to be sometimes hundreds of miles deep, and then they could be much larger, but we still wouldn't feel very much of them because we are ultimately hundreds of kilometers or miles away from them.
Oh,
and so 1 kilometer is a shallow earthquake. Right here, we can probably go put our finger almost on the fault. That's how little 1 kilometer is on the scale of the Earth.
Oh, wow. Now, we do know that there's a solar eclipse coming on Monday. Now, we know that the moon can impact waves here on Earth. What about the solar eclipse? Any potential impact there?
Well, it hasn't happened yet, so it's clearly not the cause of this one. It's not crazy to think that celestial bodies influence us, because in fact we know that the moon and the sun, they create our tides and they move water around, and they do squeeze the earth a little bit here and there very predictably and very measurably. But the influence of or linking any of this sort of distant celestial cosmic behavior to what happened here in New Jersey is very unlikely.
Well, Frederick Simons, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us now, here are some of today's top headlines. Just moments ago, Gladstone, New Jersey, about 37 miles west of New York City, was hit with a magnitude 4 aftershock. It was felt as far away as Long Island. That's following a 4.8 magnitude quake earlier today. President Biden visited the site of the Baltmore bridge collapse to assess the damage. He pledged federal support and offered condolences to the families. New York Attorney General Letitia James questioned former President Trump's $175 million bond. Her office said Trump must offer proof that the surety company he used to post the bond, Knight Specialty Insurance Company, has enough assets to pay if his appeal fails. The Israel Defense Forces released the findings of their investigation into an airstrike that killed 7 aid workers. The military fired 2 officers and also reprimanded 3 commanders for the incident. Switching from the earthquake here to the earthquake in Taiwan, retired Air Force General Robert Spalding, who was in Taiwan during the earthquake, joins us to discuss Taiwan's response to the disaster. General Spalding, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
Now, Taiwan was just hit with a 7.4 magnitude earthquake. This was the strongest in over 2 decades. You were actually in Taiwan at the time. What did you experience, or what did you see as in the response from the Taiwanese people?
Well, I was in Taipei on the subway, headed to a meeting when the earthquake happened, and the notification I got was actually I saw it on Twitter, and then the train stopped. I never felt the earthquake. They paused just for a little bit, and they did some safety inspections, and then we started up again. Then we had another tremor, and they stopped. We had some safety inspections, but to me, it was pretty seamless. And it seemed like they had the procedures all set for what they needed to do. I know people in Taipei that were we talked to on the phone that had experienced stuff falling off the wall. So I thought overall, though, the country was well prepared for it. The epicenter was towards the east of the island, which is a ways away from Taipei. It was in that east of Taiwan is very lightly populated. So while there were injuries and some fatalities, I think it would have been a lot worse if it had been one of the major population centers.
To your point, it is on an active fault line, so they do build the buildings in preparation for that. Now, this quake did just come a day after the Biden-Xi phone call. We also saw China send 9 warships and 30 jets around Taiwan after both of these, so the phone call and the earthquake. Now, Beijing's deputy ambassador to the UN was also thanking the world for its concern of Taiwan, which Taiwan immediately slammed and called, quote, shameless. Now, how could Beijing take advantage of a natural disaster like this?
Well, I mean, the way it could take advantage if it affected the mobilization response of the Taiwan forces, or if the country's leadership was heavily involved in, a lot of mass casualty event. If the country's distracted really trying to deal with a natural disaster, it could be a time when they were more vulnerable to an invasion. So that's one of the ways. I think the other way is just, trying to demonstrate the difference between the two systems, promoting the Chinese Communist Party as a much better steward of Taiwan. But in this case, I think, they're not comparable in terms of the two societies. And certainly I've seen just a fantastic leadership there in Taiwan in terms of transparency, really willing to focus on corruption and rooting out corruption. So I think, overall, from a governance perspective, Taiwan is much better governed than China, I think, will ever be under the Chinese Communist Party.
Now, China did offer earthquake aid to Taiwan, which the island quickly rejected. Now, an associate professor of political science at National University of Singapore told Time that, quote, aid from China is always conditional. Help us understand that. What kind of strings come attached with Chinese aid, especially to something like an island like Taiwan?
Well, they're always looking to take advantage of the public relations that's surrounded by, providing assistance. I think if it was major assistance where it included financial assistance or other assistance to help rebuild, then those would come with strings attached that, the Chinese Communist Party would seek concessions by Taiwan. But I think in this case, Taiwan is far too aware of the Chinese Communist Party's tricks and just aren't going to be lulled into where they have any requirement whatsoever to do anything that the Chinese Communist Party wants them to do that's against their own interests.
Now, all of this does come as Janet Yellen is actually in China now. She has criticized Beijing's, quote, coercive actions against the U.S. companies, adding she would call on the Chinese regime to provide, quote, a level field for American businesses and also address manufacturing overcapacity. How successful do you see her trip being?
I really think, as opposed to what I just said about Taiwan, this is where the United States really falls down. We're constantly falling into these Chinese Communist Party traps where we think that, by sending Secretary Yellen over, we're going to gain some type of favor in terms of, supporting U.S. interests as it relates to the relationship with China. It's just not the case. What Yellen is there for, she's on behalf of the financial industry in the United States who are seeking more market traction within China. That's not going to happen. And unfortunately, what will happen is that the Chinese Communist Party will extract some kind of concessions from Yellen because she thinks that she's going to bring something back to the financial industry. in the United States, and that's just not the case. And it's unfortunate, and I wish she would stop. I wish the federal government would stop trying to lure China in, because in reality, nothing ever comes of it that's good for the United States.
General Spalding, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Over in Washington, D.C., Mayor Muriel Bowser has unveiled a bill called the Uplift Act. It's part of her 2025 plan to combat juvenile crime and school truancy in D.C. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has details on what this proposed legislation would do.
Utilizing partnerships, local interventions for truancy and safety. That is the full name of the Uplift Act. The bill does two things. It goes after truancy, and it also forces the Office of the District Attorney of D.C. to more aggressively prosecute juveniles who commit crimes. I spoke with Angela Morabito, the spokeswoman for the Defense of Freedom Institute, where they have tracked the link in between COVID policies and the deteriorating educational results nationwide.
Truancy is really another word for chronic absenteeism. If students miss a certain number of days, they don't have excused absences, they are considered truant.
In the District of Columbia, 37% of all students have missed more than 10 days without an excuse, and thus are considered truant.
After the COVID school closure sent that wrong message to students that school just wasn't essential somehow, now that schools are reopened, there are plenty of students who say, well, why bother showing up?
In the District of Columbia in 2023, 100 juveniles were shot and 20 died in violent crimes. Over 500 carjackings and robberies were committed by juveniles, statistics that surpassed crimes committed by adults.
Chronic absenteeism and juvenile crime are two sides of the same coin. That when kids are in school, they are generally not out on the street committing crimes. And while schools do definitely need to be safer places, they are probably the most safe place for a kid to be if the alternative is out on the street.
The Uplift Act disallows the Office of the District Attorney of striking plea deals with violent juvenile offenders and refers students with more than 25 unexcused absences to the DA, who can choose to prosecute parents for neglect or abuse. According to Ms. Morabito, the crime and truancy crisis nationwide is not a matter of monetary resources or prosecutorial tools, but a matter of educational freedom.
Better schools mean stronger communities, and that doesn't necessarily mean more government control. That can mean things like freeing up teachers to teach the way their students learn best.
The next step for the bill is to be reviewed by the D.C. Council and be put to a vote. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
On the West Coast, a company that specializes in storing and protecting other people's money lost a fortune in a mystery heist. So far, no arrests have been made, and everyone is wondering just who's behind the crime. NTD's Bill Thomas tells us more from Southern California.
Several days ago on Easter Sunday, a lot of folks went to church, a lot of folks hosted an Easter Sunday brunch, and the kids took part in the annual Easter egg hunt. Later that night, a heist of epic proportions. Thieves broke into the Garda World warehouse just behind me and made away with $30 million. Garda World sits on the 15,600 block of Roxford Street in the Los Angeles suburb of Sylmar. On their website, they describe themselves as a global champion in security services, integrated risk management, and cash solutions, and they're also simply referred to as a money storage facility. So it was a surprise for everyone on Monday morning when the business opened up and they realized they'd been robbed. The LA Times reported that the thieves were so stealthy that the safe showed no signs of a break-in from the outside, and the operators of the business didn't know a thing till they opened it on Monday. Next door to the Garda World warehouse, we caught up with retired LAPD detective Moses Castillo, who tells us who he thinks is responsible for the haul.
To me, this smells of an inside job, 100%. There's no doubt in my mind.
Castillo went on to say that these buildings are very difficult to breach.
These buildings have very sophisticated alarm systems and video footage cameras everywhere. And to go undetected to the next morning, it has to be somebody that knew how to bypass all that.
One person familiar with the investigation said the thieves got into the building through the roof, and they somehow managed to avoid setting off any alarms when they got into the money storage area in the warehouse. And just exactly who does he think is responsible for this monumental money grab? One person? Maybe a group?
Either it's a current dishonest employee or somebody that was recently discharged for whatever reason or retired or whatnot. But I believe this was really well planned out. But I also believe they may have had lookouts. And sometimes when they do the operations, they'll have radio communications. monitoring the police frequency to see if the police were dispatched, and if they were, they give the people a heads up, hey, the police are coming, let's bail, let's get out of here.
FBI officials and LAPD officers are working together on this investigation, and those same LAPD officers are also looking into a variety of break-ins at Los Angeles jewelry stores. On Monday morning, they say thieves used sledgehammers to bash through a half-dozen walls across 3 businesses and a strip mall to break into a jewelry store. The owner was there, locked the doors, called the police, and the thieves took off. Bill Thomas, NTD News, Sylmar.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Former competitive swimmer Riley Gaines returned to the San Francisco area 1 year ago. Gaines said she was ambushed by protesters and required police escorts after being held in a room for several hours. NTD's Jason Blair has more on her new tour.
Riley Gaines spoke at University of California, Berkeley as part of her Reclaiming Feminism campus tour on Thursday evening.
What I will say about the reception that I've had this semester is overwhelmingly in support.
The tour aims to build, quote, a movement of students, athletes, and concerned citizens who are fed up with the attack on our freedoms and rights, and who dare to defy the dangerous gender ideology that's spreading rampant and unchecked throughout society. The event is almost exactly 1 year from an incident that happened after Gaines spoke at San Francisco State University.
These protesters, totally ambushed me and the Turning Point students in the room. There's pushing and shoving and jostling.
Gaines spoke of her experience competing against transgender swimmer Leah Thomas at the 2022 NCAA National Swimming and Diving Championships.
Who was ranked nationally against the men the year prior, 554th in the same event, the 200 free, to again now dominating, not just number 1 out of the entire country of women, dominating the entire nation.
Last month, Gaines and 15 other athletes filed a suit against the NCAA over violating Title IX.
The NCAA has failed at its most basic duties of ensuring privacy in areas of undressing, ensuring safety in our sports, especially sports that require physical contact, and ensuring equal opportunities.
The venue was close to capacity and had a diverse audience.
I believe in her cause because women should have fairness and equality in competition in sports. They should not be competing with men that are biologically men.
Where I come from, for us there is male and female and nothing in between, And really the injustice that happens, you feel that you have to do something about it actually.
Gaines's next stop include North Dakota State University and Iowa State University. Jason Blair, NTD News.
And now for your sports news, we have NTD's Dave Martin at the Sports Hub to preview the Final Four. Dave, take it away.
Thank you, Tiff. The Final Four is tomorrow night. Most people think UConn is going to run away with it, but you never know. I actually think the first matchup is a more interesting matchup. That's Purdue versus NC State. Because of the matchup in the middle, now you've got Zach Edey, who's a player of the year for Purdue, 7'4", 300 pounds. Really, no one is that big in the NCAA. But NC State has DJ Burns. He's 6'9", 275. He's at least close. Now let's look at the tail of the tape here between the two teams. As you can see here, Purdue 33-4 record. That's one of the best marks in the NCAA. It's 83.5 points per game. It's actually surprising. That's 10th best out of more than 350 teams because, of course, they just throw the ball into Edey, and really nobody can stop him there. Ditto for this 49.1%. That's 9th best in the NCAA. It's more than 350 teams that I just said. They all depend. It all depends on Zach Edey getting good position in the lane. Now you've got DJ Burns there, who's certainly going to try to push him out. That'll be a very interesting matchup. Now, NC State themselves, 26-14 record, not very impressive, of course, but they've won 9 straight games. They shocked everyone by winning the ACC tournament and by winning their region and advancing this far. This is going to be a very interesting matchup. Now, on to the second game here. We've got defending champion UConn. That 35-3 record, that is the best mark in the NCAA right now. Now, this is just very interesting here. This 81 points a game. It's actually almost exactly what Alabama averages to give up per game. Now, Alabama, this 90 points per game, that is tops in the NCAA. As is for UConn, this 63.5 here, The differential of 18 points per game between those two, that is the highest differential in the NCAA. Now, Alabama scores so high because they push the pace. So it'd be very interesting to see if UConn's defense is able to slow them down. Now, Alabama, though, they have never actually made it this far. This is their first Final Four ever. And actually, this is kind of the story of the other teams here as well. Now, this is three here for Final Fours here for Purdue. They've got no national titles. Alabama, this is their first time ever making it this far. NC State, this is their third time. They've won 2 national titles, but not in 40 years. Now, these numbers here by UConn over here, 7 Final Fours, 5 national titles. These are all in the last 25 years. They have really become a national power in the last 25 years. If they win another title here, I think we'd have to include them in the blue blood programs, along with Kansas, North Carolina, UCLA, Duke, and all of them. Now, we also have the women's Final Four games starting tonight. The first matchup is going to be number 1, South Carolina against NC State. Yeah, the NC State's women's team made it there as well. Now, South Carolina, they are, excuse me, I forgot about that. South Carolina, they are number 1 ranked, 36-0 on the regular season here. Look at this points per game, 85.5 to 56 on their defense. That is a 29-point average. That is tops in the NCAA. NC State is definitely going to have their hands full. Here, even this, 49% field goal percentage. That is the 4th best in the NCAA, while this 32% on defense, that is number 1. There are very few weaknesses on the South Carolina team. That's why they are 11.5-point favorites over NC State. Now, the much more anticipated battle is the second matchup. Why? Because that is Iowa and Caitlin Clark against perennial power UConn. Yeah, UConn is a power in women's basketball as well. Let's look at the tail of the tape here. Iowa with a 33-4 mark, very similar to UConn here. The big difference is really their scoring. That 92 points a game they're at, that is 6 more than number 2. That LSU, I think, is the second highest scoring. That is a huge margin between first and second. That is really because of Caitlin Clark. She leads the country in scoring, and she's one of the assist leaders, too. It's pretty incredible. Now, UConn, though, is actually 2.5-point favorites. They've got a little more of a complete team around Paige Beckers, who's probably their best player. Plus, they are a national power in the women's game as well. Head coach Gino Auriemma, he's won 11 national titles. He's been to 23 Final Fours. Both are the most ever. Iowa, meanwhile, never won a national title. They have been to, this is now their 3rd Final Four, including 2 in a row. So this is going to be the probably most anticipated battle of the weekend, I would think, for men's or women. This is a very hot ticket item. All right, now, moving to NBA news or college news, Bronny James, son of LeBron James, has declared for the NBA draft. He's also entered into the transfer portal. This is a very interesting development here. Now, he played for USC as a freshman last year, averaged 5 points and 3 rebounds a game. Not very impressive numbers, but he was an All-American a year ago in high school. And of course, he is the son of LeBron James. Now, LeBron has long said he has wanted to play with his sons in the NBA. Could he be reunited if some team drafts Bronny? For sure. I mean, right now, LeBron plays for the Lakers. This will be a very interesting development to watch. Players can opt out of the NBA draft, so we'll have to see if Bronny does that. Now, that's it for sports news today. Tiff, back to you.
And that's all for today's news. For around-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.